Hello everyone, Charcoal here and welcome to another discussion video. Today we're kicking off my Wings of Fire Arc 1 review series, where I work my way through the first 5 books of the series for the first time in almost a decade and give my thoughts on them, all leading up to a big video where I take every book in the main canon and rank them all. As you can probably guess, first up on the list is the first book, the Dragonet Prophecy. Let's dive in. So if you thought this was going to be a fun little kids series, you couldn't be more wrong, because this thing starts off with a bang. And by bang, I mean murder. Very gruesome murder. At this point, a new reader knows very little about this world. They'd have read the Prophecy and the Dragon Guide right before this, so they know there's a big war to decide the queen of one of the dragon tribes, and 5 dragonets are supposed to stop it. There are a good amount of dragons who believe in the Prophecy, aka what Vidar represents, but there are others who will never allow it, which Byrne showcases by killing Vidar in one of the most horrifying ways possible. This is honestly some of the best setup I've seen in the entire series. It perfectly shows the readers everything they'll need to know going into this. There will be bloodshed, the stakes are incredibly high, and stopping this war will by no means be easy for our main characters. Speaking of whom... Part 1 takes its time in introducing us to all the major characters. Clay, the perpetually hungry gentle giant and this book's protagonist. Tsunami, the one actual fighter in the group with a bit of a sarcastic edge. Glory, who gives no fucks and did the emo thing before it was cool. Starflight, the insecure nerd. And Sunny, the bundle of joy and underdog desperate to prove herself. I'll talk about Clay in more detail at the end of the video, and the others as I cover their respective books. But for now, let's talk about the Guardians. No, not those Guardians, these Guardians. Kestrel, Dune, and Webbs, the caretakers for the Dragonets of Destiny. Although I just noticed on my latest reread that they're actually referred to as Minders. That doesn't really relate to anything, I just wanted to point it out. Anyway, they have good characterization, but it should go without saying that none of these 3 are likable here. I get that's kind of the point because the Dragonets need a reason to want to escape their cave, but they go really overboard. Chaining Tsunami up, all kinds of verbal and physical abuse from Kestrel in particular, and sometimes Dune, and Webbs, despite being the one with an actual conscience, just stands off to the side without even attempting to stop the other 2. We're also introduced to Moroseer here, and he's not much better in terms of behavior. I think he's a much better character though, because it's pretty obvious he's the major villain, so hating him works a lot better. While with the other 3, the book expects you to take their side when things go south. No. Just no. Back to the plot. Moroseer wants Glory dead, so the Dragonets have to escape that night before that happens. They had planned to get out through an underground river, but Tsunami is chained up, so Clay has to do it because he can hold his breath for a really long time. Is this ability ever brought up again in any meaningful way? Nope. And then Tsunami ends up getting freed and follows Clay anyway, and ends up having to save him from getting himself killed. Having Clay be the first to go was pretty clearly a forced excuse to have him do something because it's his book. And then guess what happens next?
By sheer coincidence.
They run into Queen Scarlet of the Skywings. I love Scarlet as a character, but the way she's introduced is, again, really forced. However, her attack on the Dragonet's cave is very well done. It's a real oh crap moment for the characters and the reader, and you can feel the sense of panic as everything seemingly happens at once. Also, Dune's death here was kinda insignificant when this book first came out, but knowing what we know about him now after Deserter, it hits a lot harder. So part 1 does a great job at introducing the characters, but not all of them hit, and some of the events feel very forced, like they're only happening because the plot demands it. That said though, I still enjoyed it, and I think things will really pick up in part 2. Moving on. And I was right, this is our first big introduction to the Wings of Fire world from the main character's point of view, and I think having the Dragonets of Destiny grow up literally under a rock works really well here, because the characters are experiencing this world for the first time right along with the audience. It just makes them that much more relatable. Queen Scarlet is also present throughout most of this section, and I love her. She is an incredibly entertaining character, and it only gets better once Byrne shows up to give her someone to bounce off of. Byrne is very straightforward and wants to kill the Dragonets immediately just to get it over with, but Scarlet insists on toying with them for no other reason than it's fun. Though that does have the downside of Scarlet massively overshadowing Byrne because her love for theatrics is way more fun to read about. Peril is also introduced here, and I have some mixed feelings. She's very bratty and entitled here, and her crush on Clay basically comes out of nowhere. But the way she leaves the story, not quite sure what she wants but ready to start shaking off her old life, is a great first step in her overall story. She gets way better down the line, but here she's just okay. Now let's talk about the big thing I'd say this whole book is remembered for, the gladiator battles. Horizon vs. Peril is pretty good. It establishes Peril as a threat as well as displaying how much power the queens waging this war actually hold. It's them that the Dragonets are going to have to convince, and again, it's not going to be easy. Clay vs. Fjord isn't as good, but still alright. Fjord is an example of how even though some dragons don't want to fight, they will if they have to. Tsunami vs. Gil displays that exact same thing, but on the protagonist's side. Tsunami was not above killing a random dragon to save her own life. At least, random as far as she knew at the time. Tsunami vs. Starflight is the only one I don't like. Nothing really happens, and Moroseer just swoops in Deus Ex Machina style to rescue Starflight. It's pretty boring. Clay vs. Peril, though, is great. It really showcases how much Peril has grown, because Peril at the start of this part would have ended Clay with no hesitation. But Clay's taught her that she doesn't have to be who Scarlet says she is, while realizing the same thing about himself. It's very poetic. And of course the battle is interrupted by Glory doing, in hindsight probably the stupidest thing she could have done, venoming Queen Scarlet, thus plunging the Skywings into chaos for the next several months. And this isn't just a one-off thing. These Dragonets are supposed to be stopping a war, but everywhere they go, all they seem to do is make things worse. The one thing I really do not like about Part 2 is Kestrel. Up until now, as far as our main characters are concerned, she's been nothing but abusive since day one, and fully intended to kill one of them because her boss told her to. But suddenly now the book wants us to care about her? Give her as sad a backstory as you want, but if you're looking for sympathy, you've got the wrong guy. Overall though, Part 2 is still very good. Let's wrap this up. Part 3 is boring, simple as that. It's incredibly short, Clay finds his siblings, and that's about it. Part 1 introduced us to the characters, and Part 2 introduced us to some of the world, and then Part 3 just kinda shows us a small part of the map that's basically never touched again while shoving the moral in our face. And it feels like a very rushed and abrupt ending. Not a whole lot else to say here. The epilogue, however, is a great spot to end things on. Blister killing Kestrel, even despite what Kestrel did, is still a big shock. Plus, we get the reveal that Moroseer is, in fact, the big bad and pulling strings behind everyone's backs. And we're left in suspense wondering what's going to happen next. Very nice cliffhanger. Before I get into what I think of the book as a whole, I want to talk about Clay. He's a nice guy, but he's not a great protagonist at all. I've brought this up before, but the first protagonist of every arc has a tendency to do nothing of their own volition and just let the story carry them around. Clay is no exception. He shows very little initiative, and after this book, his default personality trait becomes hunger and nothing else. As for the book itself, I think it's good, and it holds up pretty well. It has its share of flaws, but I'm kinda glad it's nothing spectacular, cause how else is the rest of the arc supposed to show improvement? We've started off with a very solid, not great, but solid first entry to the series, and I'm properly hyped for what's to come. 7 out of 10. You know what time it is, it's fan art time. Today we have entries from Perry the Platypus, Avena, Sakuna Matata, Angry Floor, and Chicken Child. Thanks a bunch, guys. With that, this has been Wings of Charcoal, and I'll see you all in the next video.